That was April.
It was bothering me to cover.
You weren't the only one. Actually, it wasn't so much the cover, it was that big red sticker that was sticking up on it, and I was like, I'm not sure what we're supposed to do with that. But it's good, though, that the water isn't going to be evaporating all over the place, or at least that's the hope. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get things started here. Last session on lesson number 10. Anybody need a handout? I asked that once before, but we've had several people come in since then. Everybody got one? All right. So we are down here to the end of the patient persistence pays off lesson, the parable of the persistent widow. Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. And he told them a parable to the effect that they ought to always pray and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him, saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice so she will not beat me down by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? I think about God's timing and stuff. Are we not?
I say, if you're wanting to use your microphone,
Well, I hit the button.
it's not coming through a microphone.
Test, test. There it is. I had it turned on. I don't know what happened there. But anyway, when I think about God's timing on stuff, we don't ever tend to like God's timing. We want what we want when we want it. We think of children in this manner, but also it's equally true of adults. We see something, we want it, or something that we think that we need. And I think there are times that we think God is slow. I can only imagine the children of Israel, 400 years in bondage in Egypt. Is it ever going to end? Because there you're talking multiple generations that lived through the slavery that never did see freedom. And I think after a while, you're going to get a little frustrated and a little jaded. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why you see some of the responses of the children of Israel when they're out in the wilderness. Why do you build a golden calf? Well, it may have only taken a day to get Israel out of Egypt. But it took 40 years in the desert to get Egypt out of Israel. And so you go back to what you know. You go back to what you understand. Because God wasn't working fast enough for them. I also think that this could also be true of our first parents. They're in the garden. Paradise. You can eat anything you want except that tree. The fruit off of that tree, don't touch it. It's interesting, God didn't say don't ever touch it. He just said don't touch it. As if you're not ready for that yet. But of course, they're impatient. They want what they want when they want it. And of course, when Satan comes along and asks the question, did God really say? Did he? Yeah, he did. He did say, but it caused them to question the goodness of God. It caused them to question God's timing. And so they got in a rush. And of course, we know how well that one turned out. Thoughts? is a natural response because of a fallen existence. I mean, we sin, therefore we become sinners. We crave that. I remember going to the doctor when I first found out I was a diabetic. And the doctor going, you need to go see the dietitian. So I go meet with the dietitian. And she's like, you're not supposed to eat this, or this. And half the stuff on that list I didn't even like so much. But I found myself wanting to eat it afterwards. Simply because I had been told that I couldn't have it. And I don't know what it was. I told Kim, I said, I have never craved this stuff in my entire life. And now that I've been told that I can't have it, I want it. And so it's just weird how things transpire like that, where it's, oh man, I really want to do that. I know I shouldn't do it, but I really want to do it. And then on the other side, it's like, come on, God, hurry up. But I don't know, maybe the rest of you were this way. I've had times in life where years later I have been very grateful that God did not answer my prayer the way that I wanted Him to. It's like, sometimes the problem isn't not having what we want. Sometimes the problem is we get what we want, and it's not necessarily a positive outcome.
Well, I think of, and I'm not additional Catholic religion, but it seems like, and maybe it's not true of all Catholics, but you often see in movies or whatever, where they'll do something they know is wrong, and they'll go, let's go to confession.
Yeah.
And that's it. You know, but
That,
they turn around and do it again.
yeah, that is one of the primary issues that I draw with confession. One, the temple veil's been torn. We don't need priests to forgive our sins anymore. Not that they ever did in the first place, but they were mediators. And then secondly is that issue of, well, I know I shouldn't do this, but I can just, like you said, I can just go to confession and I'll have to say X number of Our Fathers or Hail Marys or do something and I'll get absolution. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my Catholic friends that are doing this, and I'm like, I don't think it works the way that you think it works. Because you are purposely doing something with the concept of, I'll just go to confession. Now, before we beat up too much on our Catholic neighbors, we do it too. It's the, I'll just repent later. I want to do this now. I want the instant gratification. I want the instant payoff. So I'm just going to do it now and then I'm going to repent later.
Well, I think of when Jesus talked to the Samaritan woman, he knew what she had done in her past.
Yeah.
Go and sin no more. He didn't mean that she was never going to sin, but he asked her not to do that particular.
Yeah, and see, that's the part that we often miss. We like the non-judgmental part. We like the part, where it's, or even the woman caught in the act of adultery, who's going to be here to, condemn you? Nobody. Well, I'm not going to do it either. We like those parts, but we don't like the part where it is, don't go and sin anymore. The woman that had all the husbands. I'm sure Jesus, it's not recorded in the text, but I'm sure Jesus spent a little bit of time with her going beyond that. Same with the woman caught in the act of adultery. Yeah, it's go and sin no more, and here's the reasons why. That may not be recorded for us, but I don't think Jesus just dropped it right there. We like the no condemnation part. But the problem that we run into is, in doing stuff, knowing that we shouldn't do it, we make grace very cheap. Because it's like, well, like Paul said, should I continue sinning so that grace would abound? To paraphrase, heck no. You should not keep sinning so that grace abounds. All right. Good questions, good thoughts. Anybody else? Before we dig into our life lessons. All right, there are many ways in which this parable helps us to be better disciples of Jesus and better overall servants of God. So, 2 life lessons we look at here. 1, we must always remember that God doesn't get in a hurry. We are time-oriented creatures. I try not to be. I would really like to not be a time-oriented creature. I rather liked the time that I spent in Haiti. They are event-oriented. They are not time-oriented. Same thing when I was in Laos. Event-oriented, not time-oriented. If they tell you they're going to show up at 1:30 and they make it before 3, they're not late. They're there for the event. They're not necessarily there for the time. When I was in Haiti, we did a revival, and all of us guys took turns preaching. It's the first time I'd ever preached. I was 15 years old. Well, on the last night of the revival, we decided to start an hour early because we had to get back to pack and fly out very early the next morning. Yeah, well, the Haitians didn't take it that way. Start an hour earlier to them, that was just another hour they got to sing. Song service that night was 3.5 hours long. It was an interesting experience. But we tend to watch the clock. We want to watch the clock. I don't, but our culture does. And we want it yesterday. In my family, that would be my son. I love him dearly. I don't like going on vacation with him because I want to rest. And he's like, what time are we doing this? Where are we going now? What time's that going to be? It's like, no, put your watch away.
That's what you do when you have just 2 people on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
That works.
That's one of the reasons why on vacations Noah doesn't get to go on one of them. Where it's just me and Kim and we go somewhere, you know. And it's honestly, it's not that bad. But there are times like, don't even ask me when we're doing this. Just relax. So remember that God doesn't get in a hurry. All of our lives are controlled and limited by time. We set goals, we establish limits, which involve time. But God is beyond time. He can look at all the time and see all as through it as if it were present. He doesn't get in a hurry. 1,000 years is a day is 1,000 years. You know, that's poetic speech. It's not literal, but there are aspects of that we can look at and that we can take to the bank and go, wonder how long this is going to take. Especially if it's something that's important to us. You have a loved one that's sick, struggling with health issues. Or you have a family that's fractured for whatever reason. And you pray, and you pray, and you pray, and nothing happens. And you find it mind-numbingly frustrating. I remember back as a kid, I was in junior high. We could camp at Shelby County Christian Assembly outside Clarence, Missouri. Wasn't my home camp, but I went there because my brother preached at a local church. I had a good friend at camp. We'd gone to camp a couple of summers together. And he wanted to become a Christian. He wanted to get baptized. He asked me to do it. I thought that was really awesome. And so at camp, and it's still a policy at every church camp that I know, that if a kid wants to get baptized there at camp, you got to call mom and dad first. Get mom and dad's permission. Good thought process, considering the kid is a minor and there are legalities involved. Well, he called his dad, and I was standing in the room, and I heard every word that his dad said, and several of them I cannot repeat in this room. The answer was no. And when he handed the phone to the dean got it just like he did. You're brainwashing my kid, you're doing this, you're doing that. Well, this was early in the week. And there was a group of us, I don't know how many times a day we got together to pray. Prayed like we'd never prayed before. Because we wanted this to happen. Well, you know what? It never did happen. And unfortunately, to this day, that friend of mine is not a Christian. And I often wonder, okay, that prayer didn't return anything. Why not? Because it wasn't like we were praying for something selfish. And I'll admit, we were just junior hires. Maybe we didn't understand exactly what we were doing, but we were trying to do what we'd been taught to do.
Well, you say it didn't return anything. It didn't return what you were asking for.
Yeah, well, and that's the way you looked at it. And for years, and it did, it took me a long time to understand it, but for years I had that opinion. What did we not do for this to come about? And in fact, it was funny because you fast forward a half a dozen years, and I'm at a retreat for the beginning of the school year in college, and we're at that same camp because it's just right up the road. And a friend of mine comes up to me during this retreat and says, "Hey Jim, will you baptize me?" I'm like, I didn't know you hadn't been. You know, it's like, where did I, we didn't grow up in the same town together, but we knew, it was like, when did I miss this memo? And so it was like, hey, this is pretty cool, because the last time I was going to do that here, it got deflected. But no, God works in the way that he does, and I don't understand it, and maybe I'm not supposed to understand it. But it's like, okay, what's God's timing here? My hope and prayer has always been, I hope somebody gets a hold of him. I'm not in a place where I get to visit with him all that often.
I know we're not judges in this kind of cases or any case, but what do you think God will feel about that parent until that child dies?
Here's the way I look at it. We are, if I understand Scripture correctly, we are not judged for what we do out of ignorance. And I hope and I pray that that is a case of ignorance. Whether his dad had a bad experience with the church, or if there was something behind it that was driving it outside of a, this is absurd and I'm just going to say no. I have never seen God judge somebody for unbelief. See, we tend to use the terms unbelief and disbelief interchangeably. They're not the same words. In fact, sometimes even our Bible translations use them interchangeably in places where they shouldn't. Unbelief is lack of information. It's ignorance. It's, I'm doing this out of something that I don't understand. Disbelief, that gets condemned all day long. That's the, I know this is right, and I don't care. If his dad was in that position, I wouldn't want to be there on Judgment Day. That's all I can say. And you hope that God has worked in that man's life between, what happened 30 32, 33 years ago and today. You know, when Jesus talks about our actions towards little children and the millstone around the neck, that's a pretty intense response to that. And it's true. Because what we do with our children impacts the rest of our life. I mean, inevitably it did on my friend there. Because he never became, at least never to my knowledge, became a Christian. You know, I don't know, because we weren't together on a regular enough basis. I mean, we'd only see each other 2 or 3 times a year. And so on that end, I don't know. I know that relationship was always strained to a certain degree. But as far as the intricacies of it, I'm not aware of. But it wouldn't be the first time, because the dean that got accused of brainwashing the kid, I've had that conversation with parents as a dean, where not only is the answer no, the answer is no with words that I can't repeat in polite company. And it frustrates you. I remember my dad telling a story of a young man in one of the churches where he preached. Great kid, wanted to become a Christian. The family had immigrated from an Asian country over the course of the conflicts that were raging, and the kid had started coming to youth group and wanted to get baptized, and mom said no. Mom said no. So he's a teenager. So of course dad was unable to do anything. Doesn't mean his friends weren't able to do something. Because they went out and did it anyway. So how do you respond to that?
Why do you send your kid to a Christian camp? It's like,
Well, but see, that's the thing. A lot of times I think the parents just look at it as, it's a week without my kid.
yeah.
I don't think you totally wrap your head around it. Because I mean, we get kids out here at Little Galilee all the time, whose parents have absolutely no concept of what we're doing. Oh, you're going to summer camp with a friend. And it's a week that I don't have to, it's kind of like when we do VBS. You'd get all kinds of kids because mom and dad looked at it as free babysitting for a night. And we're like, yeah, heck yeah, we'll take it all day long. The more the merrier. But in that situation, I guess his friends took care of what mom and dad said no on. And the guy's been a preacher for, 45 years.
In my case, though, Jim,
Uh-huh.
I moved to this area when I was 3,
Mhm.
and the denomination that my parents had normally attended, they could have gone 4 miles this way to get it, and 7 miles that way. They took me 2 blocks down the road to the Christian church.
Yeah.
When I wanted to be a Christian, my mother said no,
Yeah.
and still said no, even when I was 18, and I started coming here with Terry and chose to do it. She came to baptism, and she cried.
She was not pleased with, yeah. It's
She accepted it later and was fine and
Yeah.
was happy that I was.
But it took a while to,
Oh, yeah. But
yeah.
she was adamant. She'd say, "We are not having this argument because you are not doing this."
Yep. And it's amazing how that happens. And it's a common reality. In fact, I think one of the craziest ones that I ever had, and it wasn't bad, it wasn't a bad conversation, but inevitably, because I always deemed wilderness or outposts, so you had smaller groups, but inevitably about half of those kids would not come from a Christian church background. And I had one week there where I had a girl that had come with one of her friends, And Mom and Dad were all for it. Well, the friend was going to get baptized there at camp, and so this young lady wanted to. And she's like, I don't think Mom and Dad will have any issue with it. Okay, so I picked up the phone and I called Mom and Dad. Well, Dad was like, well, while I understand her desire, I'm going to have to say no. We are very active Missouri Synod Lutherans, and we take a different position on it than that. And, and he's like, so I'm going to have to say no. But he said, I'm going to tell you why I send my daughter to your camp. I can't send my daughter to our camp because our camp doesn't teach the Bible. And he says, I appreciate everything that you do. I understand her desire, but I'm going to have to say no. And on that one, I'm sitting there going, okay. So you got to respect the parent, but at the same time, you're kind of like, oh, come on.
Could there be a time, though, when you'd say that, and the parent would say, I understand where you're coming from. I don't think my daughter's ready for it yet.
Oh, and I've had that. Yes. Yes.
Your friends do.
Yes. And I have had that. I have no problem with that. Because if a parent comes to me and says, I don't think your kids are ready, or I don't think my kids are ready, that's fine. Now, I've had the opposite of that, where I've had parents that have come to me, my kid's ready, and I've talked to the kid, and I'm like, your kid's not ready.
Yeah.
And often they don't like that, but it's like, because it's weird. Because I've sat down and I've had conversations with 6-year-olds that have blown me out of the water, and I've sat down talking to somebody who's 13 or 14, and it's like, yeah, we need to study this just a little bit more. So, you get a little bit of everything. So, dealing with God's time, he says, remember when he had promised to destroy the Amalekites in the Old Testament, he chose to take 100 years to accomplish that promise. He promised Adam and Eve that one would come to bruise the head of the serpent, yet he waited thousands of years to do so. Through the coming of Jesus, or waited 1,000 years to do so, through the coming of Jesus. We should be patient. We should all be patient with God's responses. Often the delays may help us develop patience. Be careful about praying for patience, because God will give you something that tries your patience. I prayed for patience once, and God gave me a friend who tried my patience to no end. And I learned more with that situation than I did in several Bible college classes, where it's like, okay, I know I prayed for patience, but you're abusing the privilege, And so,
you have to pray for God, grant me the patience.
Yes.
To deal with this person.
yeah, yep,
That's from personal experience.
yeah. Well, there was a preacher and theologian who actually grew up over here at the Congregational Church in Lincoln. What is the United Church of Christ today? I think that's what it is, St. John's. By the name of H. Richard Niebuhr, and he penned the Serenity Prayer. God, God grant me. We have to be patient in life, and it's a case-by-case basis a lot of times. We can handle the no's. We can easily handle the yeses, but it's the not now that we really struggle with. And then, of course, the second one down there, we must ask ourselves this question: will the Son of Man find faith when he returns? The last verse. What's Jesus going to find when he returns? I've often seen it put out there, and I've posited the question a few times. How would the Apostle Paul begin a letter to the American church? To the Church of the United States of America. I don't even know where to start with you guys. What I think would often be the beginning of it. Or in the first couple of chapters of the book of Revelation, when Jesus is writing the letter to the churches in Asia. What would Jesus say? Probably the same thing to the church in America. What in the world are you all doing? Now, that's not in all quarters, and that's not every church. But as a composite picture, lostness is winning. Absurdity is winning. When churches celebrate things that God wiped out the world for, we've got a problem. We want to be liked. There's nothing wrong with that. We want to be accepted. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we turn around and we redefine stuff so that we can have people like us, we've missed the point. Isn't it an interesting end to a parable? At first glance, one may ask, what does this have to do with the woman's persistent pleas to the judge? Is God going to find faithfulness? Well, was the judge faithful in the carrying out of his duties? There's the question for you. But when we see this parable in its totality, it makes perfect sense. The parable teaches us that we must trust God even though we don't really understand what he's doing. Do I have faith? Do you have faith? Well, what is faith? Whole-souled acceptance that what God says is true based on the sufficiency of the evidence. If God says that he's going to do it, you can take it to the bank. We may not like the timing. We may not understand the timing. We may not even like the way that he does it. But he's going to do it. Our culture tells us that faith is blind. Well, do you understand this? No, I'm willing to go on a little faith here. Yeah, well, what kind of faith is that? It's kind of like hope. I think a lot of times we define hope as that pie in the sky, gee, I hope so. No, our hope is tied directly to our faith. Our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. Those aren't unknowns. Those are known quantities. And in the end, faith is doing what God says. And God says, be patient, my children. Be patient. And we look back at God oftentimes and go, what? You're holding out on us, in the case of Adam and Eve, or you're not working fast enough, in the case of pretty much everything else that we want to see done. So do we have faith? What is our response to the evidence that God provides? How do we look at it? Now, we can Monday morning quarterback it all we want. Oh, you stupid, doubting disciples, I would have done it differently. Oh, you hard-hearted, stiff-necked children of Israel, I would have done it differently. No, you wouldn't have. You may be good, but you're not that good. I may be good, but I'm not that good. We can Monday morning quarterback anything because we know the end of the story. Hindsight is always 20/20. Put yourself in the position. We should never be so prideful to think that we would do it differently. Oh, we may have succeeded in one place where they didn't, but they would have succeeded in some place where we didn't. We sometimes fret about whether or not God will do what he says he will do. But Jesus reorients our thinking. The question is not, is God faithful? The question is, are we faithful? And the passage from Hebrews, the hall of heroes of the faith, those that were faithful, that when you look at them, and we've preached through it, Nick drew a whole bunch of really cool pictures for us when we preached through it. They were just as flawed, if not more flawed, than we were. But there was faith there. They were persistent in their prayers, and they were persistent in their faith. Are we? Thoughts? Comments?
You know, then guys, good if God just stuck in us someplace that, like a gas station says, you're full of faith or you're really empty.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to judge yourself.
It really is. And you know, I think we would want something like that. But I have this stinking suspicion that if God did give us a gauge, we'd start worshiping the gauge instead of worshiping Him. I don't know, that's just my initial thought process. It's like, that's where the tool becomes the object of the worship, because it's, or we want to, yeah, or we,
Well, that's true.
no, I understand, and you're not, the desire is like, yeah, that'd be great.
So I'm not always confident. I mean, I try to be faithful, but I can't do, how often do I fail Him? 'Cause,
Oh, yeah.
I'd just like to know,
Yeah. Oh no, we all would,
you know,
because we fail.
maybe I should do more, have more faith in one area than I have in another.
Yeah.
Something, I don't know. But
Well, we're all given the gift of faith. Faith is a gift, but what we do with it is completely up to us. Do you grow it, or do you just let it run on cruise control? You can't let it just run on cruise control, it'll never grow. But on the other side of it, if we work too hard at it, is it really faith, or is it us trying to control stuff? So there's this balance that we have to strike. And it's not always easy to do. In fact, 25 years in the ministry and, good grief, what is it now? 33, 34 years as a Christian. I don't have it figured out.
I guess I talked to someone last week, and he said, well, I have 3 different Bible, or 3 different devotions I read, I do this and do that. I said, take a step back.
Yeah.
You're overdoing it, and in doing that, you're not doing any of it well.
Yeah.
And the works aren't
Yeah.
going to get you
Well,
what you think it's going to get.
That's one of those things, and I think that's where the gauge comes in that you were talking about. It's quantity over quality. Because I know people kind of like that, where you do all of this stuff, but you're doing it so fast and so much that is it really sinking in?
Exactly.
Is it really something that is having an impact on your life? And unfortunately, only that person can answer that question. Anybody else? All right, well, we'll call it good. We're done about 5 minutes early this week, but we will start lesson 11 next week.